My name's Eye Delmonico. I'm the technical manager for the Canadian Beef Centre of Excellence, and what we're going to be doing today is we're going to look at a section of the beef animal that's considered to be fairly tough, but there's opportunities with these sections that we've overlooked in the past. The chuck roll itself is part of the shoulder complex, and the shoulder complex consists of the shoulder round bone, the blade section. The chuck roll is part of that blade section in the shoulder clod area. Here we have the chuck roll as it comes out of the bag. And one of the things that we found with this particular piece, because of the amount of fat and marbling in it, it's an excellent product as a pulled beef product. Now, to create that, you have to put a rub on this, a full rub with something like this Carolina rub, fully on the outside. Generally, in a large oven pan, we do basically a slow braise overnight in a combi oven. And the combi oven is ideal for this because it uses both moist heat and dry heat cooking at the same time, so you can maintain a really nice environment for slow braising overnight. Now, this is a large section. It's between 11 and 13 kilos, or 22 to about 26 pounds. And consequently, it's going to take a long time for that braise to fully work. It's cooked slowly. It's cooked at about 225 degrees Fahrenheit and cooked to an internal temperature of at least 185, ideally to about 205. The meat pulls apart after that, and we call it, our Hispanic friends call this barbacoa. Simply then it's a matter of adding a barbecue sauce of some kind and generally some herbs and spices to the mixture. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove the chuck eye from the chuck roll. And there's a natural seam. All these muscles are basically separated on seams. And as you can see here, what I'm doing here is looking for that natural seam and just opening that up with my knife. So we're pulling that seam away. So we've got the chuck eye, which is this section here, removed from the underblade. You can sort of see some of the characteristics of a ribeye muscle right there. Very similar to the ribeye. Now, we can't call it ribeye because it's in the chuck area. So in Canada, we're regulated on where we call what we call a cut based on where it is anatomically on the beef animal. So this has to be called chuck in the name. So the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has regulated that. So we can call it chuck, but we can also give it a bit of maybe a little nicer name, and we've been calling this a Delmonico. So this section here, to where this muscle ends right here, is a Delmonico. So if you think about this, it's got the same characteristics as a prime rib, but this much of it, which would be probably about a kilo of weight, is basically a ribeye muscle because it's got all of the characteristics of the ribeye to this point. Now this here is going to get a little tougher as we get into this area because we're getting into the neck. And those shoulder muscles are going to have a little bit more connective tissue. There's fibers that are surrounding the muscle, and it would need a different cooking application, which would be basically a braised application or a pot roasting application. But let's have a look at these Delmonicos. I put some strings on this because these muscles, they just won't hold up quite as nicely without a string on it. So there's 3 beautiful little Delmonico steaks. After I've taken the Delmonicos off, now I'm going to manufacture this into a chuck eye roast. I could put strings around it and make a roast, but it's quite large and it's going to take a long time to cook. We found that by creating roasts that are more tubular. It helps the cooking process. It's easier to carve the roast after it's being cooked, and it cuts down the cooking time. So we'll do that. We'll just separate this by splitting this muscle in half. As you can see, there's very little fat or waste on this. There's a little bit of trimming on the outside edge here that I need to remove a little bit of this elastin. You can sort of see down here it's a little bit tapered. By pulling that in a little tighter, it's going to cook more even. This is a 4-pounder, approximately a 2-kilo roast, and that would easily feed 8 people. Probably a family of 4. We'd look at about half of that. That creates something that's more affordable, something that's a little bit smaller size, and is going to meet the demands of a smaller family. So this is an ideal size for that. Again, I look at these and I'd say, well, it's a pot roast. It's not critical, but again, I look at it and I say it should be squared off a little bit. All of these little bits and pieces that we take off as we're cutting a steak or a roast, all of that's valuable. Trim from different parts of the animal will utilize different things. On some of the more tender cuts, the trim I'll use for stir fry. In this case, because it is a little bit tougher, it's ideal for burgers and for sausage. After taking out the chuck eye muscle out of the chuck roll, now we're going to remove the Sierra. The Sierra looks very, very similar to the flank steak, and the flank steak is a section that has become very popular. So by finding another cut that is similar to that particular cut, looks the same, eats the same, has the same characteristics, we're creating a lot more value out of this section. So let's have a look and find that little muscle. And again, it's finding that natural seam. I can see it sitting on top. You can see the bit of the natural grain running across this way. So that's our Sierra. It doesn't look all that good right now, but it needs a little bit of work to get off some of this excess fat, some of the excess collagen and elastin that's sitting on the outside edges. What I'm looking at as I look at this section is the beautiful grain direction of this. It's consistent. And that's, if I have grains that are running this direction and this direction and this direction, you know that it's not going to perform very well from an eating perspective, because it's very difficult to carve across the grains and make those muscle fibers smaller. It's the same with this other side of it. It's critical to take off some of this tissue on the outside. So here we've got this pretty much trimmed up the way we want it. And those of you who are familiar with the flank steak and the shape and the grain direction of the flank steak could easily mistake this for a flank. We have taken this, just applied a seasoning to it. With a little bit of age, it's performed well without any marination or marinating to break down the connective tissue. It's quite nice. The critical thing here with any of these, what I consider to be thin cuts, like the flank, the skirt meat, in this case the Sierra, the hanger, flap meat, is when you carve it, you have to carve it at a 45-degree angle across the grain. It's carving it on the bias. It will help break down the connective tissue a little bit, but it'll also give you a better plate presentation. I think you have to imagine this a little bit when I do this now, because I'll show you basic carving technique in terms of, if we imagine this to be a cooked product, you want to make sure that you carve it on a bias like this. As you can see, it makes for a nicer surface, and it's going to perform a little better. So that's our Sierra. Sometimes a butcher, especially with a flank steak, will score the outside like this and put hatch marks across. It gives a nice visual on the product, but it's also a practical reason. It also allows the marinade to penetrate a little bit more. When you are marinating something, generally it's marinated for at least anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. In some of the cases with flank steaks and Sierras, if it's not from a top grade, you probably marinate it at least for 12 to 24 hours to impart a better flavor profile and also break down the connective tissue to become more tender. After removing the Sierra and trimming it, we're left with the rest of the underblade, and we've got a truly hidden gem in here. It's called a chuck flat, and again, with the muscle profiling and understanding the tenderness of the muscles based on the Werner-Bratzler test, this is considered to be one of the 7 most tender muscles on the beef animal. These are truly hidden gems, harvested and cut properly. You can create a tremendous amount of value out of this chuck roll. So you can sort of see this is where the short rib section was, or the chuck flat, and it extends into the chuck roll right here. And I'm looking at the grain direction here. It goes to approximately right along that seam or that line. If we look at this side, we're going to take off some of the membrane here, but you can sort of see where it kind of extends down and we get into a fatty tissue in here. We're going to remove that, and that's going to become trim. And it's the same on this. We're looking at this little fat seam right in here. We're going to remove that right there. And that is our extension of the chuck flat that extends into the chuck roll. So as you can see, this is a significant section of meat. It weighs between 1.5 to 2 kilos on average. And again, harvested and cut properly. It's a tremendous value. The chuck flat itself is generally about double the price of the chuck roll. So that gives you some idea of the ability to harvest these sections, and the Delmonico would be similar to that, and the Sierra would be similar to that too if you were buying them separately. So now it's just a matter of trimming this a little better, getting rid of some of the excess fat and some of the collagen and any elastin that might be on this. And what's nice about this too, it's just a beautiful shape. It blocks out nicely, either for a steak or if you want to use it. Like a lot of fine dining restaurants are using this section as a short rib, and it would be a short braise because of the tenderness. But it's got a beautiful beefy flavor. You can decide on the portion size with this. You can have anywhere from probably 180 gram portion size to probably close to 300 grams, or a 6 ounce portion to a 12 or 14 ounce portion easily. And the marbling is just beautiful in this, as you'll see when we block these off into portions. So you can sort of see all that intermuscular fat that's running through here. This can perform on any menu as a great dinner steak or a lunch steak. It's got great tenderness and eating potential. What we have here is a little bit of trim left from the underblade. I would say that, just this by itself, again, using this kind of a seasoning rub, doing a slow roast on this overnight, again, similar to what I talked about right at the very beginning of this, not taking any of the fat off or any of the outside edges, maybe a little bit of this heavy connective tissue, that's going to make a wonderful barbacoa again. So this is an ideal size now, after harvesting some of these other sections that have tremendous value by taking out that Delmonico and by taking out the Sierra, having this left over, and then creating that barbacoa with these parts. It's a true winning way to utilize this product and get the best eating experience out of all of it. It's just building your menu around this particular section now. As I mentioned earlier, taking some of these cubes now, because of the marbling in them, we can take portions like this, a little end piece off of that Denver area, the chuck flat, make these wonderful little cubes. And look at the marbling in these little pieces as we're doing that, putting a little bit of seasoning on them. What we have is great little steak bites. They're deep fried, and all of this can be used for that application. And again, with all the testing that we've done with this particular product, it works out really well. Great little bar food type of item, or could be used as a luncheon item too. To me, ground chuck is the premium of all grinds because of the fat content. This by itself, generally just ground, the chuck roll would have about 20 to 25% fat, which is ideal for making burgers or a high-end, really good quality sausage. You have to have some fat in those particular products to make a good end result. And this is an ideal source grind. So all of this could be used for trimming. That's going to make a premium ground beef or a premium sausage. I could block these off, square them up a little bit, cube them. Taking this is a little bit into the hump area or the top shoulder area. You see where that pronounced hump is, especially on the male animals. That's going to be tough for sure. We know that. But tough is good in stews. So we would block this off into cubes. And we have an excellent stewing product. The chuck, normally it always sells or commands a little bit higher price in the wintertime because people are looking for more braising items and stewing kinds of items. So we have these pot roast items or pot roast options like this, which I can manufacture into any of these parts as well, or some of the other cuts that we harvested a little earlier from the Denver, the Sierra, the chuck flat, which are the Denver cuts. So a lot of different possibilities with the chuck eye roll, a lot of different options, some great opportunities for both retail and food service.